welcome to the video about the midpoint between 2 points. We want to start out by plotting these 2 points and just maybe approximating where the midpoint would be. Obviously the midpoint is going to be the middle of the distance between the 2 points. So if we start with the point 2, 3, and then the point 8, 7, those are 2 points. I'm going to just draw a line from those 2 points. So the middle looks to be about 5, 5. Everyone agree that the middle from here to here and the middle from here to here, that the middle would be here at 5, 5. That splits this line exactly in half, 2 equal halves. So this might be the midpoint. And it's all well and good to approximate this, but when we don't have a graph to look at, we want to be able to exactly find the midpoint using some algebra. So we have the midpoint formula, fancy paper here, and we made it small on purpose, and now it's big so you can see it. Okay, so the midpoint formula, oh, let's make it even bigger. The midpoint formula is an average. I want you to think of it as an average where you're taking the x values, and we're just going to add them in this case. A lot of the formulas you've been using, we subtract the x values, but in this case we're going to add the x values and divide it by 2. We have 2 x values. Add them up, divide by 2. That's like finding the average of the x values. And so that makes sense that the middle of the x's might be the average of the x values. So that gets our x value. Remember, it's always x and then y in a coordinate point. And so then we're going to add up the 2 y values. So we're going to find the average of the y values. And that's going to get us our y coordinate. So if you think of this like an average, whenever you find an average, it's add up all the data values and divide by the number of data values you have. Well, here we have 2 data values, so we divide by 2. So that's how we're going to find the midpoint. Let's look at a specific example. So, just like before, if it's helpful to label them, we can label this x1, y1, x2, y2. To find the midpoint, we're going to take x1 plus x2 and divide by 2. And we're going to take y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Okay, so the midpoint is going to be 5 plus 9 divided by 2 and 7 plus 13 divided by 2. Make sure you add before you divide. And so if you're doing this in your calculator, you're going to need to put 5 plus 9 in parentheses and then divide by 2. Or 7 plus 13 in parentheses and then divide by 2. Or you should be able to do a lot of this in your head. 5 plus 9 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. That's going to be our x coordinate. 7 plus 13 is 20. 20 divided by 2 is 10. So our midpoint between 5, 7 and 9, 13 is 7, 10. If you weren't sure about this, you'd probably want to plot the 2 points and the midpoint on a coordinate grid and double check that that makes sense. Here's another example. Again, x1, y1, x2, y2. Find the midpoint, so we're going to do x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2, bigger parentheses. And so, negative 2 plus 8 divided by 2, and 8 minus 14, because when you add a negative it becomes minus, divided by 2. So here, same thing, except we have some negatives to deal with, so you need to be careful with that. Negative 2 plus 8 is just 6 divided by 2, or 3. And 8 subtract 14 is negative 6 divided by 2, or negative 3. So our midpoint is 3, negative 3. One more example of this. We have x1, y1, x2, y2. Midpoint, we're going to do x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. If it's always helpful to write down the formula to start out, then write down the formula to start out. Add up the x's. 5 plus a negative 6 just becomes 5 subtract 6 divided by 2, and negative 14, excuse me, 14 plus 5 divided by 2. Looks like we might have some fractions here, and that is okay. 5 subtract 6 is negative 1 divided by 2. We're going to leave that as negative 1/2. Negative 14 plus 5 is negative 9 divided by 2. You can leave these as these fractions. You can convert the second one to negative 4 1/2. Or if you're most comfortable with decimals, this would be negative 0.5 and negative 4.5. So some choices there. Now, midpoint's pretty easy. Hopefully you think so as well. Here's just 2 examples where we have 2 or 3 examples, excuse me, where we have the midpoint already. This is our midpoint already. And we have the end point, but we don't know what the other end point is down here, that this is the middle for. So we're going to have to do a little bit of solving here to find the missing end point. And so what we're going to do is use the formula. So we say the midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And I'm going to use just the x part to start out. So if I know that the x value of the midpoint is 8, then I can say, well, I know it's going to be 8 as the midpoint for the x. And I know my x1, well, that's 5. What I don't know is my x2, but I know I need to divide everything by 2. So here I have a little equation that I can solve for the x2, my missing x value. Well, if all of this is being divided by 2, the opposite of dividing by 2 is multiplying by 2. So if I multiply by 2 on both sides, then that gets rid of the x here, right? When we solve equations, we're undoing, we're using opposite operations to undo. Well, that leaves me with 16 on this side and 5 plus x squared over here. Well, let's get the x squared by itself. Let's subtract 5 from both sides. So it looks like my x squared is 11. I'm going to set up a similar equation, but for my y values. My y midpoint is 14. So 14 is equal to my y1, which is 8, plus y2, I don't know, divided by 2. Again, multiply by 2 on both sides to get rid of the divide by 2. So 28 is equal to 8 plus y2. Subtract 8 from both sides. y2 is equal to 20. So my end point, my other end point, is 11, 20. Or my b, I can fill in as 11, 20. Pretty neat. Hopefully drawing on some of your solving skills from previous math courses. Let's look at 2 more examples. Again, we have A, we have midpoint. We don't know what our B value is going to be, the other endpoint. Set it up the same way. If I know my midpoint for x is 2, and I know my x1 value, negative 5, and I don't know my x2 value, but I know I have to divide this by 2, I can just set this up. I'm going to just skip a step here. You know you have to multiply by 2, and that's going to cancel out on this side. And so if I multiply by 2 here, I know I'm going to have 4 here. Negative 5 plus x squared. Be careful, it's negative here, so the opposite would be adding 5. So my x2 is going to be 9. 4 plus 5 is 9. set up my midpoint for my y's. My midpoint's also true for y. Here's my y1, so that's going to be 12 plus y2 over 2 multiplied by 2, so I have 4 is equal to 12 plus y2 minus 12 from both sides, subtract 12. 4 subtract 12 is negative 8 is equal to y2. So my endpoint is 9 and negative 8. You can fill it in here, 9 and negative 8. Again, if you're not sure, you need to check your answers, go ahead and plot the coordinate points on a grid, and you should be able to see the midpoint and that it makes sense. One last example here. x1, y1, here's my midpoint. My midpoint x is negative 13. I know that that comes from x1 plus x2. I know my x1 is 4 already, so I can just fill in 4. Divide by 2. To solve for x2, I have to multiply by 2 on both sides. So that's going to be negative 26 is equal to 4 plus x2. If I subtract 4 from both sides, negative 30 is equal to x2. Wow, I just totally skipped ahead. Sorry about that. I still have... No, I'm sorry. Wow. Maybe if I showed my work, I would know what I was doing. I multiply by 2, but on both sides. Multiply by 2, so I have 26. And I subtracted 4. 4 is canceled, so I have negative 30 is equal to x2. Good job. Sorry about that. My y value, midpoint, is 50. So that's equal to my y1, 14, plus y2 over 2. Multiply by 2 on both sides, so that's 100. 14 plus y2 minus 14 from both sides. So it looks like my y2 is 86. So my other endpoint is going to be negative 30 and 86. A little harder to plot these points because they're so big, they might be off your grid paper, but you can always check. So my other endpoint is negative 30 and 86. Hope this makes sense. Like I always say, we'll practice this in class. Good luck.